friends, my name is Kayla Rayne, and today I'm doing my monthly recommendations for the month of April, where we are focusing on books with mental health representation. Monthly Recs is a Goodreads group that I started with my good friend Trina over at Between Chapters, and I will leave links in the down bar below for all of the information. And I am super excited about this month's topic because mental health is something that is very near and dear to me. I am in the mental health profession. It's something that I find very interesting and I'm also very passionate about because I think that it is such a diverse field to be in, and there's so much to learn, and we've come so far and we still have so far to go. So talking about this really makes me happy because it just shows some of the progress that we've made within young adult literature as far as representation goes and having those characters present in storylines. Something that's really interesting about mental illness is even though there is a basis in how each mental illness presents and the different symptoms, everyone can experience those symptoms differently. There's so many different factors that go into how someone experiences a particular mental health diagnosis, and I think that that's why it's so important to have a variety of different stories to tell, because there might be one really great book about bipolar disorder, but that is not the single narrative, and that won't necessarily be everyone's experience with that particular diagnosis. So for me personally, the more the merrier. I think we need a variety of different voices producing books that tell that narrative and those experiences, and I do have some books to share today that I think do it well and discuss it in a way that is healthy for readers because it allows the main characters to have their storyline while experiencing their mental illness. And I think that's really important, that not every book that talks about mental illness necessarily has to be an issues book surrounding that particular mental illness. It can also just be a narrative where the main character is experiencing that diagnosis and also living their life simultaneously, because that is what happens for people who have a mental health diagnosis. They live their lives while experiencing that diagnosis. So I have some books to share today that I really enjoy. Again, they are not necessarily the single narrative, so if this wasn't your experience or you feel like it is an experience that you have seen before, that's okay, that's fine. Like I said, everyone experiences it differently. There is that basis for a diagnosis, but again, symptoms will be different for every individual. So the first book I have to recommend will probably come as no surprise to anyone, but that is The Upside of Unrequited by Becky Albertalli. This is a YA contemporary book that follows a main character named Molly who does have anxiety. One of the things that I really adore about this book in particular is the fact that Molly is managing her anxiety post-therapy and figuring out her medication, and I think that that was really cool to see because she's already been through the therapeutic process. She's already kind of experimented with the medications that work best for her, and she knows what's going on and what she needs and what's best for her. So that was really great to see that illustrated in this novel. I really loved it. I adore this book in general, but that particular piece I think is really important and really well done. Next, I have How to Make a Wish by Ashley Herring Blake. This is actually a side character that I'm going to be discussing. It is the mother of the main character. She has a substance use disorder, and I think that the way that this particular topic was handled was just done really well. I really enjoyed the narrative around it and how there was compassion when talking about her mother, because I think sometimes, especially in YA, there is an issue with describing parents with a substance use disorder in such a distant manner, and it almost makes them seem less human. This book did not do that. The mother was very much a human character, and you could see her strengths and her flaws, and I think that was really important to have included in this narrative. Substance use disorder is something that I don't see a lot of great representation in YA, so I thought this was really fantastic. Still on the search for a main character who is dealing with that particular diagnosis, however. This book doesn't go into any dual diagnoses or discuss any of that in great depth. It's more of the perception of the main character and her relationship with her mother with a substance use disorder. So just putting that out there. This isn't like a very in-depth representation, but I thought that it was respectful. And again, that humanization of the main character's mother was really important to me. The next book I have is Eliza and Her Monsters by Francesca Zappia. This is a book that dives into anxiety and also suicidal ideation and completion of suicide. So I think that this book did a really great job of handling all those topics in a really respectful way. I do want to put a content warning out there, however, for the suicidal ideation and the completion of suicide, because there is a character within this book who does complete suicide. It is not actually shown, it's just discussed, which I think was really important. And I think that it also discussed well what you do after something like that happens, because it's very difficult for people who are close to someone who has completed suicide, and this book did a really great job of discussing that respectfully and not using offensive and harmful language towards the person who did complete suicide. That is so important to me. I definitely get my feathers ruffled when people speak illy of others who have either attempted or completed suicide. It is definitely a subject that needs more empathy and compassion, and I think that this book did that really well. The next 3 books that I have to recommend are my final books in this video, but also they all focus on bipolar disorder, and I think that this is something that I'm seeing quite a bit of in YA, and I appreciate that because it's something that I don't think is talked about a lot, because it's a diagnosis that doesn't necessarily come along within your younger adolescent years. It's more late teens to early 20s, and these 3 books are also own voices, which I think is really important. So it actually displays how people experience that differently and their own personal experiences and how that translates into the art that they present. So the first book that I have is Wintersong by S.J. Jones. This book doesn't explicitly say bipolar disorder, but it is discussed in the author's note that that is what's going on. This is a historical fantasy novel, so that language probably wasn't even present at the time that this novel really took place, so that makes sense that it wasn't explicitly stated, but you do get to see the main character go through some of those symptoms and experience that along with her narrative, and I really enjoyed how that was tangled into this fantasy. Honestly, reading this just made me really excited to read The Girl from Everywhere, because I know that's another situation where there is representation of bipolar disorder kind of woven into this fantasy setting, and that is just really amazing to me, and I absolutely adore that this is a thing. But this book was just really great, and I would love to see more mental health representation in fantasy and other genres outside of contemporary. Next, I have Little and Lion by Brandy Colbert. This book follows a main character who has moved back to her hometown in California from boarding school because her brother does have a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, and she wants to be supportive of him during the summer and to see what she can do to kind of make sure that he has the supports that he needs. And this book, I think, did a really great job discussing how family is so integral and how your support system is so integral when dealing with a mental health diagnosis, because sometimes it can be difficult to navigate, especially in the early stages. This book did a great job of discussing how sometimes therapeutic and medication intervention isn't always the solution, and how it doesn't always work out how it's intended, and how it can be very difficult and sometimes just discouraging. I thought that that was so important. I am definitely an advocate for therapy and medical intervention if necessary, but again, it's all up to the client. It should be client-centered and what they feel is best for them, because they know their body better than anyone else, and they know what is good for them, as well as their family, who can be supportive when sometimes they might make decisions that can be destructive. And this book did a really great job of narrating that particular situation. And finally, I have When We Collided by Emery. This is a book that has a dual perspective, and I really enjoyed that you got to see the 2 different characters and how that same storyline played out. So it does follow Vivi and her boyfriend, and Vivi does have bipolar disorder, and this is another book where it discusses therapy and medication, and I adore that that was included in here. And again, one of the unique things about this book is you get to see that perspective both from the character who is living with bipolar disorder and the character who's dating her. And again, it's all done very empathetically with a lot of compassion and understanding. I think that's really important when you have a character who isn't experiencing the mental illness. When it's a side character, there needs to be empathy, compassion, understanding, and even learning in there. And I think this book did a really great job of doing all of those things. And this is honestly just one of my favorite contemporaries in general, because I feel like it is just so unique in the way that it's written and the way that the storyline plays out, and I just really adored that. So just a general recommendation here, but also that mental health representation is present. Alright, that has been it for today's video. Again, I will leave links in the down bar below for all of my social media sites, as well as my Goodreads account with the monthly recommendations group, and y'all should totally check that out. As always, thank you so much for watching. Stay weird.